Hey guys, tonight we're traveling far back to a time of stone walls, flickering candlelight, and prayers whispered in cold breath. You're not just hearing about it, you're in it. You're lying on a straw mattress inside a medieval convent in northern France. It's still the dead of night, or maybe it's early morning. Hard to say. The moon has slipped behind the clouds and the frost on the window glows faintly like starlight. Your feet are wrapped in scratchy wool, but they're still cold. The stone floor beneath you holds onto the chill like it's sacred. You hear nothing, yet that's the unnerving part. Silence so thick it feels like it's pressing against your face. A silence that says something is about to happen. The other sisters are still asleep. You can hear the slow, steady breath of Sister Aline, curled up in the bunk next to yours, her rosary beads tangled around her wrist. Somewhere down the corridor someone stirs, a creaking woodboard, a muffled cough. The convent is waking, but slowly, intentionally. And you're already awake. Not because someone woke you, not yet. No bell has rung, no footstep has passed your door. But you know it's time. Your body knows. Somehow, it always does. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments what time is it where you are and where are you listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up, slowly. The wool blanket clings to your robe, dusted in your own warmth. You've been dreaming of bread again, soft, fresh, impossible bread. But here in the convent, breakfast is 2 hours away, and it'll be boiled turnips again, the kind that apologize with every bite. You swing your legs to the side of the bed and place your bare toes on the frigid floor. Instantly, the cold jolts your spine awake. There's a reason they call this spiritual discipline. Your feet are already praying. You dress in silence, guided only by muscle memory, tunic, habit, scapula, a thin veil over your now sensitized scalp. There's no mirror, but you already know how you look. Pale, determined, and slightly annoyed that God insists on being adored this early. Your breath comes out in faint clouds as you move. The air smells like stone and old incense, like secrets and devotion and damp wood. You hear the faintest plink in the darkness, the drip of a water clock somewhere in the main corridor. It's been calibrated to hit the hourglass mark precisely. When that clay bowl fills and tips over, the bells will ring. But not yet. You step out into the corridor, your soft leather soles brushing against dusted stone. A few nuns have already moved into the chapel, shadows in candlelight. They don't talk. They never do. Words are for prayer, and right now, even prayer is still warming up. You notice the walls, tapestries depicting saints and martyrs look down on you like exhausted grandparents. One of them, Saint Cecilia, has an almost smug expression. She was martyred to a song. You're just trying to survive matins. The chapel is dim, but not dark. A few candles burn low on a wooden altar. The air feels older here, like it's been praying for centuries and you're just another breath in the litany. You kneel, you wait. And this is the moment. This hush, this breath, this liminal stretch between night and day, when you realize something odd. There is no one designated to wake you, no nun poked you, no bell has rung, but every one of you woke up. Somehow, everyone just knew. Of course, it's not always this seamless. Sometimes, a novice oversleeps. Once, Sister Agnes was found still dreaming halfway through Lauds. She claimed it was a vision. The abbess called it sloth. The punishment was interpretive silence. But most nights, like this one, everyone wakes, even though time itself is slippery in the dark and the tools to measure it are little more than burning wax or dripping bowls. That's the mystery we'll unravel tonight. How a group of sleep-deprived, God-fearing women in cold stone buildings found ways to wake themselves before the rooster even considered crowing, and, in the process, accidentally invented one of the earliest known versions of the alarm clock. So breathe in. Let the chill wrap around you, because the bell hasn't rung. Yet. You're still kneeling in the chapel. The candlelight flickers against the cold stone walls, casting tall shadows that sway like quiet ghosts. You shift slightly on the worn wooden kneeler, bones stiff from sleep and cold, but you stay still. There's no music, no chant, yet, just silence. And that's the point. This hour before dawn is called the Holy Hush. In the rule of Saint Benedict, it's emphasized that matins, the first prayer of the day, should be done while the world is still asleep, and more importantly, before any light dares to break into the sky. The idea? God listens more closely when everything else is silent. It sounds poetic. It also sounds like something someone came up with before central heating was invented. But you get it. There's something about this time of night that feels raw. Not just spiritually, but physically. You're hungry, your back aches, your eyelids threaten mutiny. And yet, somehow, the stillness makes you feel like you're part of something impossibly ancient. Your breath echoes a little in the chapel. You can hear the other sisters arriving now, soft footsteps, a cough stifled into cloth, the whisper of habits brushing past each other. No one talks. It's an unspoken rule. If the sun isn't up, neither are your vocal cords. You look around and see the candle clock glowing on the ledge. One candle, marked in rings, melts slowly. Each ring equals roughly 30 minutes. If the wax melts down to the second mark, it's time for Lauds. If you miscalculate, the prayers go late, and someone gets the stare of doom from the abbess. You don't want the stare of doom. It's scarier than eternal damnation, at least at 4 a.m. There's something oddly futuristic about how medieval nuns tracked time. They didn't rely on the sun, too unreliable. They didn't have roosters in the chapel, too loud. Instead, they created their own quiet tools, candles that marked time, water bowls that dripped steadily until tipping, and eventually, bells rigged with clever mechanisms. But it wasn't just about technical innovation. This obsession with waking early, before light, was deeply spiritual. You see, early Christian theology emphasized the darkness as a time of testing. The idea was, if you could wake up and pray before anything else in the world stirred, you were putting God above comfort, above rest, above even basic survival instincts. Historians still argue whether this practice came more from genuine devotion or a desire to enforce discipline. Some say it was about hierarchy, proving to God and the community that you were truly committed. Others argue it was a practical necessity in an agrarian world. Wake early, work hard, die piously. But in convents especially, the discipline of pre-dawn worship took on a life of its own. It's also worth noting that this holy hour wasn't entirely universal. In warmer climates, matins might be shifted slightly later, closer to dawn. In colder areas, it might be compressed into shorter, quicker chants to avoid frostbite. But the ideal, the golden hour of worship, remained the same. Pray when no one else is. You look up at the high-arched ceiling and wonder if anyone ever fell asleep mid-prayer. Of course they did. There's even a record of one abbey where a novice was found gently snoring during Psalm 63. No one said anything. Instead, a senior sister accidentally dropped her book nearby to wake her. In this world, even scolding is silent. One fringe theory suggests that matins also served a practical role in sleep cycles. Medieval people often slept in two shifts, first sleep and second sleep, broken by a brief period of wakefulness in the middle of the night. Praying during this natural wake period may have aligned with the body's rhythm, though given the yawns you're holding back, it still feels unnatural. Another theory says it was just hard to stay asleep on straw-filled mattresses, with drafty stone walls, no insulation, and the occasional mouse checking if your ear was edible. Regardless, you're here, awake before dawn, kneeling in flickering light, listening for the moment when the bell will ring gently and mark the start of spoken prayer. You feel your mind wandering, which is dangerous at this hour. The chapel isn't just a place of worship, it's a test of mental stamina. One sleepy nod, and you'll be the next legend whispered about during kitchen duty. But then you remember, This hour matters. The idea of sacrifice, of choosing discomfort, of waking before your body is ready, because your soul might be. And maybe, just maybe, that's why nuns became the first women in history to tinker with timekeeping. Because faith demanded not only attention, but precise attention. You glance again at the candle. The wax is close to the second ring. Any second now, a bead of wax drips. And then, from somewhere high above the chapel door, a small bell rings. Not loud, just enough. Matins has begun. You rise along with everyone else. The silence fades, replaced by soft chant. Latin syllables float in the air like smoke. And now, the day truly begins. Your eyes follow the slow drip of wax down the length of the candle. It's hypnotic, almost meditative, like watching someone pour tea in slow motion. But here, it's not just a mood, it's a measurement. This candle isn't ordinary, it's your clock. Back in your own century, you might set an alarm on your phone, slap the snooze button 3 times, and still be late for work. But here, in the dim world of 11th century convent life, timekeeping is quieter and a bit flammable. The candle you're staring at is marked with tiny notches, each etched carefully by a sister whose hands probably shook after holding a stylus for too long. Each mark represents 30 minutes. As the candle burns, the wax drips lower and lower, passing each line like a monk pacing the cloister. It's primitive, sure, but surprisingly accurate. Well, assuming there's no wind, no humidity spike, and the wax is pure. This wasn't just a clever hack by one nun with insomnia. Medieval convents across Europe began using what we now call graduated candles to track the hours. These weren't scented spa candles either. They were often made from tallow, animal fat, or beeswax, the latter being more expensive but less likely to smell like regret. And they worked, sort of. Historians still debate whether candle clocks were precise or just good enough for the purposes of prayer. After all, when your main goal is to chant 7 times a day in honor of divine order, a 15-minute fudge factor might not be the end of the world, though you wouldn't want to risk it under a particularly punctual abbess. One curious twist: some of these candles came with built-in bells. Yes, really. Small metal balls were embedded at specific levels. When the candle melted past the ball, it dropped into a metal base, letting out a tiny ding, like a medieval microwave. This alarm let the sisters know it was time to rise and pray. It's widely considered one of the earliest forms of mechanical, time-based alerts. If that sounds suspiciously like an alarm clock, that's because it kind of is. Most modern historians give a nod to a 12th century invention by the Buddhist monk Yi Xing in China as the first true mechanical clock. But these little candle contraptions in Europe, they were doing the job long before the gears and weights showed up. In fact, some scholars argue that these prayer-triggered devices are proto-clocks, early attempts to measure and act on time without needing a sundial or astrolabe. And who were their inventors? Often women, nuns, quietly experimenting in the corners of their cells, modifying candle molds, testing how different wax blends burn. Imagine Sister Agnes leaning over a vat of boiling beeswax while muttering about how yesterday's wick was too fast. It's not quite the image of a typical medieval woman, is it? But convents weren't just holy spaces. They were hubs of innovation. Scribes, herbalists, astronomers, and yes, amateur engineers all lived behind those stone walls. Nuns preserved knowledge, recorded medical recipes, designed embroidery patterns using fractal geometry, and apparently invented time-sensitive fire hazards. Some candles were even rigged with weights and pulleys. As the wax melted, the descending candle would trigger a system of gears that rang a bell or opened a door. Think of it as the medieval version of a Rube Goldberg machine, if Rube Goldberg had been worried about missing Vespers. Still, these weren't perfect. Candle clocks were notoriously fussy. A draft could skew the burn rate. Impure wax could sputter and stall. Rats could knock them over. Yes, that actually happened in a convent in Saxony. Sister Gertrude never forgave that rat. So eventually some monasteries turned to water clocks, clepsydras. These were essentially bowls with holes that dripped water at a steady rate. When the bowl filled or emptied, it signaled the passing of time. One version even had a little floating figure who popped up with a tiny scroll when it was prayer time. Cute, slightly creepy, but effective. Again, historians disagree about how widely these water clocks were used. Some think they were rare and ceremonial. Others argue that nuns and monks used them daily but didn't record it. Because who documents something that just works? The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. And yet, the candle remains iconic. There's something poetic about measuring devotion in wax. The more it melts, the closer you are to the next prayer, and the more light you've offered up in the process. You glance back at your candle, watching another line dissolve. You wonder who first thought to notch a candle. Were they bored, brilliant, desperate to not oversleep and get scolded again? Or maybe it was just practical. After all, timekeeping wasn't about productivity back then. It was about holiness, aligning your body and your life with rhythms believed to be divine. Praying not when you felt like it, but when the candle told you God was listening. You smile faintly. There's something kind of beautiful about that. Even if the chapel still smells like beeswax and smoke. You wake to a muffled crow, distant and half-hearted, like a rooster with low self-esteem. It's barely a suggestion of dawn, yet your convent is already humming with the rustle of habits and the soft thuds of bare feet on stone. Time to rise. Again, the rooster used to be enough. For centuries before alarms and bell towers, the average person leaned heavily on barnyard timekeepers. Roosters crowed with uncanny regularity at daybreak. Nature's alarm clock, right? Except not always. A cloudy sky, a late night pecking at bugs, or sheer poultry laziness could throw everything off. And in a medieval convent, being off by even 20 minutes meant missing matins. The all-important nighttime prayer usually scheduled sometime between 2 and 4 a.m. So if your divine schedule hinges on the punctuality of a bird with no concept of eternal salvation, you start looking for alternatives. Enter the nun-powered alarm system. Sister Lucia, for example, was known as a human rooster. Her internal clock was so reliable that the abbess once declared she slept with the Lord's own pocket watch beneath her habit. Cute, but problematic. Because what happens when Sister Lucia gets sick or drifts off after too much warm goat milk? This was the heart of the problem. As prayer schedules grew stricter and more complex, the need for reliable timekeeping increased. In the Benedictine tradition, for example, there were 7 set prayer times each day, known as the Divine Office. These weren't suggestions, they were sacred appointments. And if the rooster flaked, the whole schedule unraveled. So communities began developing better systems. Bells were the next big thing. At first, someone, usually a sleepy novice, was tasked with staying up and ringing a handbell at the correct time. But again, human error. Even the holiest among them sometimes nodded off during a particularly slow chant. You can't blame them. Gregorian plainsong has all the tempo of a glacier. So the handbell was upgraded. Convents began installing hanging bells in wooden towers, small at first, then massive. These weren't just for prayer, they signaled mealtimes, emergencies, visitors, even laundry rotations. One nun at Barking Abbey allegedly rang the same bell for both Vespers and soup, leading to a particularly confusing Wednesday. To keep the schedule precise, the bell ringer needed a way to track time, which brought us back to those candle clocks, and later to some surprisingly sophisticated mechanical devices. Historians still debate when the first weight-driven mechanical clocks made their way into religious settings. Some say the 13th century. Others argue they were earlier, but undocumented because the inventors were too humble or too worried the church would consider them heretical. The truth? It's delightfully messy. One widely accepted milestone is the clock at the Cathedral of Salisbury in England, dated to around 1386. It had no face, just gears and bells. That's right, a faceless timekeeper built entirely to ring at intervals. Functional, ominous, and oddly poetic, like a Fitbit possessed by a monk. And while these clocks were often maintained by men, monks, church caretakers, or traveling artisans, convents weren't left out. There are scattered records of nunneries commissioning their own bell mechanisms, often to regulate prayer, but also to protect female autonomy. A clock meant no need to rely on a priest or outsider. It meant control. Some scholars point to the Abbey of the Paraclete, founded by the famously brilliant Eloise, yes, that Eloise, of Abelard fame, as one of the first convents to experiment with water-powered time devices. No rooster, no Sister Lucia, just gears, water flow, and a determined group of women with sacred deadlines. And speaking of deadlines, you better get moving. The bell just rang for Lauds, the dawn prayer. You shuffle into the chapel, still foggy with sleep. The smell of candle wax and morning breath fills the air. A chill runs down your back, not from divine awe, but because the stone bench is freezing. You fold your hands, bow your head, and begin. Outside, the rooster crows again, late but enthusiastic. Too little, too late, buddy. You shuffle out of the chapel after Lauds, the second of 7 prayer sessions today, and your body is already craving sleep like a monk craves silence after the novices finish choir practice. But there's no going back to bed. There's a garden to tend, scripture to copy, and meals to prepare. Plus, you've been assigned candle-watching duty. Ah yes, the candle clock. Glorified wax on a stick, you think. But this humble timekeeping tool was revolutionary in its own flickering, melty way. Here's the setup. Take a tall, uniform candle. Mark it with hourly intervals, scratches, bits of colored string, or embedded metal balls. As the candle burns, the time is measured by how much has melted. Some even dropped little metal pins into trays as they fell, giving off a faint plink, a soothing little chime for the sleepless nun in the next cell. It's elegant, simple, a minor miracle of physics and faith. But you've heard rumors, whispers from the older sisters that the candle clocks were fiddled with, not maliciously, just creatively. Sister Anselma once trimmed the base of the evening candle to make compline come faster. Just a little spiritual efficiency, she said, hiding the wax shavings in her sleeve. In the strictest houses, this was serious business. If your abbess discovered you'd shortened the candle to get extra sleep, it wasn't just rule-breaking. It bordered on heresy. You were stealing time from God, literally. So the candles had to be standardized. In some regions, monks and nuns ordered their time candles from specialized chandlers who guaranteed consistent wax density, wick thickness, and burn rate. Imagine being the medieval equivalent of an Apple Genius bar for candles. That was your life if you were a 13th century time chandler. But even then, the system wasn't perfect. Humidity, breeze, and wick quirks all affected burn speed. On damp days, the candle might flicker slower than usual. On dry, drafty nights, it might raise through its hours like a sinner through confession. A few abbeys even kept backup clocks, sand timers, or hourglasses to cross-check. Historians still argue whether the famed candle timers of Cluny Abbey were accurate to within 15 minutes or if that was just medieval bragging. Let's be honest. When your frame of reference is a rooster or a sundial, 15 minutes either way feels practically atomic. Then, of course, came the bells. When the candle's wax reached a pin, the metal would drop into a tin pan with a light clink. That sound was the cue. Get up, or pray, or stop praying and eat. Sometimes the bells were amplified by small wooden boxes designed to echo, like tiny acoustic amplifiers for time. One curious tidbit, At least 2 nunneries are recorded as having sleep bells, gentle chimes rung, not to wake people, but to remind them it was okay to rest. That's right. Medieval nuns invented bedtime reminders. Long before meditation apps and sleep podcasts, they were acoustically easing into slumber. And just imagine the candlelit room where all this was happening. The scent of beeswax in the air, the gentle shuffle of woolen robes, the quiet mutter of Latin prayers. Somewhere, a candlepin drops. Somewhere else, a sleepy scribe dribbles ink on her parchment. The rhythm of time was not rigid. It was felt, smelled, heard, burned slowly, one wax inch at a time. By the way, this section of convent life, it was deeply gendered. Male monasteries often had the luxury of more sophisticated clockwork, mechanical escapements, weight-driven bells, complex gongs. But nuns worked with simpler tools. Their ingenuity had to stretch further, and stretch it did. There's at least one record from 14th century France of a convent where nuns experimented with scented candles, lavender or rosemary, to mark different prayer hours by smell. A kind of medieval aromatherapy calendar. If it smells like time, one sister supposedly joked, you've missed Vespers. Whether that's true or just the medieval equivalent of a dad joke, no one's sure. Still, it's soothing to think of time not as ticks and numbers, but as flickers, scents, and soft sounds. You could fall asleep to that, couldn't you? Now, back to your candle. It's halfway melted. Time for terse, or maybe a nap disguised as contemplation. Either way, the wax waits for no one. By mid-morning, your legs ache from standing, your fingers are ink-stained from copying psalms, and your stomach grumbles just loud enough for Sister Magdalene to glance sideways at you during terce. But you soldier on, lulled not by rest, but by the hypnotic rhythm of chant. Gregorian, of course, slow, somber, soothing like a warm wool blanket thrown over the soul. If you've never experienced Gregorian chant firsthand, it's hard to explain its peculiar spell. There's no melody you'd hum at a feast, no beat you'd tap with your foot, just long, droning syllables rising and falling, like breath through stone walls. And when 40 women in identical habits sing it together, something strange happens. Not just spiritually, but physically. Their breathing synchronizes. Their heart rates begin to align. Modern researchers have even shown that chanting communities display signs of grouped heartbeat entrainment. Basically, your chest learns to beat in time with everyone else's. You don't notice it at first. But by the second psalm, your yawns arrive exactly between stanzas. You're not bored. Okay, maybe a little, but mostly it's the trance. The harmony of repetitive syllables washing over you. The warmth of the sun filtering through stained glass. The scent of old wood and wax. You blink once, twice, and forget the cold stone under your sandals. Historically, this kind of chant was more than just prayer. It was timekeeping. The length of the office of terce, for example, could fluctuate depending on how quickly the choir moved through the antiphons. Some abbeys became known for speed praying, others for their reverent molasses slow pace. There was even minor rivalry between monasteries. Benedictines chant like they're raising death versus Cistercians chant like they're already halfway to heaven. Mild ecclesiastical shade, if you will. Historians still argue whether some of the slow chant traditions developed due to poor lighting. You couldn't read fast if the only candle was half a room away, or as deliberate meditative practice. Either way, it had a clear bonus. It lulled people to the edge of sleep. Yes, even the devout sometimes nodded off mid-hymn. There's a well-documented 12th century case of a monk in Cologne who, During matins, fell asleep standing and collapsed like a falling oak. The choir didn't even stop. They just stepped around him and carried on singing. That's dedication, or extreme sleep deprivation. But here's where it gets fun. In some houses, sleepyheads weren't punished. They were engineered. The abbess would schedule extra long chants during harvest season, knowing the physical labor would knock the sisters out by complaint. Or on cold winter nights, she might swap in lullaby-like melodies to help the sisters sleep through noisy winds outside. Imagine that, tailoring divine music for REM cycles. That's practically a Spotify playlist, Medieval Monastery Vibes, Volume 1. And oh, the architecture. Don't forget, those high vaulted ceilings weren't just for show. They created natural acoustics that turned even whispered chant into celestial reverb. You could be 2 feet off key and still sound like an angel. The space carried you, cradled your voice in echoes. It also explains why some nuns were way too into chanting. Sister Odilia, for instance, once insisted on adding flourishes and trills to every third line of the Magnificat. For our Lord, she said. But the other sisters knew it was really for Sister Joanna in the second row, competition disguised as piety. Still, it's hard not to be moved. In this moment, with your lips forming vowels from a dead language, your hands folded neatly, your mind drifting between phrases, you start to feel it. That odd, peaceful emptiness, the sacred blankness of repetition. Like you're floating through history's longest lullaby. One chant, one breath, one note stretched over centuries. You glance toward the abbess's stall. Her eyes are closed. Her lips still move. Is she meditating, praying, asleep? Hard to say. But you decide not to judge. Because honestly, you're half asleep too. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the soul listens better when the mind is soft and slow, humming along with the voices of countless forgotten nuns before you. The chant ends. Silence. Then a faint creak of a wooden bench. A cough. The rustle of robes. And now, onto the garden. Unless you can sneak a nap behind the sacristy first, you step outside into the cloister courtyard, blinking against the light. The stone walls, warmed by the mid-morning sun, radiate a gentleness that belies their formidable purpose, to separate the holy from the worldly. Inside these walls lies the convent's herb garden, a mix of chaos and control, much like the nuns who tend it. Your feet crunch on gravel paths bordered by raised beds of thyme, marjoram, and rosemary. A lazy bee bumps into your veil, clearly confused. The scent of crushed mint trails behind Sister Beatrix, who's snipping chamomile blossoms into a woven basket. She's muttering a prayer under her breath. Not for divine guidance, but because she's been locked in a fierce turf war with the nettles. They're winning. This isn't just a garden. It's the medieval version of a pharmacy, kitchen, and spa day, all in one. Monastic gardens were where medicine met mysticism. Nearly every plant had a spiritual and practical use. Lavender, good for migraines and banishing demons. Rue, wards off plague and gossip, though not always in that order. And mugwort, sweet mugwort. Sleep aid, menstrual regulator, and occasional vision-inducing herb, depending on how daring you felt. Historians still argue whether the monastic garden was primarily medicinal or mystical. Some treatises from the 11th century list elaborate recipes for ointments and teas, while others include charmingly vague directions like boil it till the devil leaves the root. So, not FDA approved. You crouch next to a bushy clump of sage and help gather a handful of leaves for the noonday infusion. Your fingers smell like sunlight and sap. Sister Hildegard appears at your side holding a jug of rainwater and offers a faint smile. She hasn't spoken a full sentence in 3 years, but her eyes say, "Don't crush the basil again. Fair enough. Many of these sisters weren't just gardeners. They were pioneering herbalists. Hildegard of Bingen herself, yes, that Hildegard, was a nun, composer, and proto-botanist who documented over 300 medicinal plants. Her book, Physica, still gets quoted in wellness blogs, which might make her weep or laugh depending on her mood. The convent's library, which you're not supposed to sneak into during recreation hour, but you definitely do, contains a battered copy. Margins filled with notes, tiny corrections, and one rather annoyed scribble. Do not mix valerian and wine again. It turns out, even holy women needed stress relief. In truth, these gardens weren't only about healing the body. They were about creating pockets of peace, enclosed spaces designed for quiet contemplation, tending, and patience. You weed, prune, harvest, not because it's urgent, but because it isn't. The rhythm is the reward. Plus, let's be honest, it's a nice break from chanting in unheated chapels. The culinary benefits aren't bad either. Nuns were resourceful cooks, using herbs to flavor their famously bland pottages and gruels. Garlic mustard, lovage and wild leeks, strong enough to make you question your vows when they finally hit the soup pot. And then there were the secret recipes, passed down nun to nun, whispered in kitchens like sacred rites. Healing balms for sore joints, sleep teas with just enough poppy to nudge you toward dreams, and rose petal preserves so delicious they could bring a bishop to tears. One legend even tells of Sister Lucinda, who baked spiced fig cakes that allegedly ended a minor war. It was more of a territorial squabble between two abbots, but still, she never shared the recipe. Claimed it came to her in a dream from Saint Apollonia, patroness of dentistry and baked goods, apparently. Back in your own dreamlike days, you follow the rest of the sisters inside, the herb baskets brimming with green offerings. A few snails hitch a ride. No one minds. As you pass beneath the cloister archway, you pause for a moment. The wind shifts, and you catch a last whiff of crushed lemon balm. A moment of quiet, fragrant bliss. Tomorrow the rosemary might die, the rabbits might break in. But for now, the garden is safe, steady, still blooming. Like the rhythm of prayer, like the cycle of bells, like you. You step outside into the cloister courtyard, blinking against the light. The stone walls, warmed by the mid-morning sun, radiate a gentleness that belies their formidable purpose: to separate the holy from the worldly. Inside these walls lies the convent's herb garden, a mix of chaos and control, much like the nuns who tend it. Your feet crunch on gravel paths bordered by raised beds of thyme, marjoram, and rosemary. A lazy bee bumps into your veil, clearly confused. The scent of crushed mint trails behind Sister Beatrix, who's snipping chamomile blossoms into a woven basket. She's muttering a prayer under her breath, not for divine guidance, but because she's been locked in a fierce turf war with the nettles. They're winning. This isn't just a garden, it's the medieval version of a pharmacy, kitchen, and spa day, all in one. Monastic gardens were where medicine met mysticism. Nearly every plant had a spiritual and practical use. Lavender, good for migraines and banishing demons. Rue, wards off plague and gossip, though not always in that order. And mugwort, sweet mugwort, sleep aid, menstrual regulator, and occasional vision-inducing herb, depending on how daring you felt. Historians still argue whether the monastic garden was primarily medicinal or mystical. Some treatises from the 11th century list elaborate recipes for ointments and teas, while others include charmingly vague directions like boil it till the devil leaves the root. So, not FDA approved. You crouch next to a bushy clump of sage and help gather a handful of leaves for the noonday infusion. Your fingers smell like sunlight and sap. Sister Hildegard appears at your side holding a jug of rainwater and offers a faint smile. She hasn't spoken a full sentence in 3 years, but her eyes say, "Don't crush the basil again." Fair enough. Many of these sisters weren't just gardeners, they were pioneering herbalists. Hildegard of Bingen herself, yes, that Hildegard, was a nun, composer, and proto-botanist who documented over 300 medicinal plants. Her book, Physica, still gets quoted in wellness blogs, which might make her weep or laugh depending on her mood. The convent's library, which you are not supposed to sneak into during recreation hour, but you definitely do, contains a battered copy. Margins filled with notes, tiny corrections, and one rather annoyed scribble. "Do not mix valerian and wine again." It turns out even holy women needed stress relief. In truth, these gardens weren't only about healing the body. They were about creating pockets of peace, enclosed spaces designed for quiet contemplation, tending, and patience. You weed, prune, harvest, not because it's urgent, but because it isn't. The rhythm is the reward. Plus, let's be honest, it's a nice break from chanting in unheated chapels. The culinary benefits aren't bad either. Nuns were resourceful cooks, using herbs to flavor their famously bland pottages and gruels. Garlic mustard, lovage, and wild leeks, strong enough to make you question your vows when they finally hit the soup pot. And then there were the secret recipes, passed down nun to nun, whispered in kitchens like sacred rites. Healing balms for sore joints, sleep teas with just enough poppy to nudge you toward dreams, and rose petal preserves so delicious they could bring a bishop to tears. One legend even tells of Sister Lucinda, who baked spiced fig cakes that allegedly ended a minor war. It was more of a territorial squabble between two abbots, but still, she never shared the recipe, claimed it came to her in a dream from Saint Apollonia, patroness of dentistry and baked goods apparently. Back in your own dreamlike days, you follow the rest of the sisters inside, the herb baskets brimming with green offerings. A few snails hitch a ride, no one minds. As you pass beneath the cloister archway, you pause for a moment. The wind shifts, and you catch a last whiff of crushed lemon balm. A moment of quiet, fragrant bliss. Tomorrow, the rosemary might die, the rabbits might break in, but for now, the garden is safe, steady, still blooming, like the rhythm of prayer, like the cycle of bells, like you. By now your fingers are dry from laundry, but your eyes are about to get sore, because today's your turn in the scriptorium, a long sunlit chamber filled with the gentle scraping of quills, the faint smell of vellum, and the deep silence of concentration. You slide into your wooden chair, creaky and unforgiving, and unroll the sheet of parchment before you. The ink is already mixed, oak gall, iron sulfate, and vinegar, and your quill has been trimmed to the finest point you could manage this morning with a penknife that's seen better days. Time to copy the Word of God, or at least the 15th sermon of St. Bernard. This is where medieval nuns spent hundreds, if not thousands, of hours, copying texts letter by painstaking letter. You're not just writing, you're praying with every curve of a letter. The idea is that this process, this act of creation is a form of worship, except when it's not. Like when your hand cramps halfway through Lamentations, or you misspell episcopus for the 3rd time and ink blotches splatter like accusations from heaven. One of the lesser-known facts, many medieval convents had robust scriptoria, especially in places like Germany, Italy, and the British Isles. Some convents produced entire libraries worth of theological texts, medical manuals, and even illustrated bestiaries. Women weren't just copying, they were translating, compiling, even composing. And in the margins, the real fun began. There's a myth that marginalia, those strange doodles of rabbits jousting or nuns playing lutes, were exclusive to bored monks. Not true. Nuns got cheeky too. Historians still argue whether certain scandalous sketches found in illuminated texts were deliberate satire, symbolic commentary, or just someone having a rough day and drawing a farting dragon for catharsis. Today you're trying to ignore the temptation to sneak a tiny fish with human legs into the corner of the page. You resist? Barely. Instead, you pause and glance around the room. Sister Althea is halfway through a treatise on herbal remedies. Her page is immaculate. Gold leaf titles, elegant lettering, and a watercolor of a leech that somehow looks majestic. Show off. Next to her, Sister Benedetta is whispering corrections under her breath, flicking her quill with such intensity that you suspect she is cursing in Latin. There's a camaraderie here too, though no one talks. The soft rustle of parchment, the occasional frustrated sigh, and the rhythmic scratching of dozens of quills form their own sort of music. Like rain on a monastery roof. You know the work is sacred, but it's not without flaws. A surprising number of manuscripts include a note at the bottom that says something like, "This took forever," or "Thank God it's finished." One even reads, "The scribe was tired." You relate deeply to that unknown sister. As you continue copying, your mind drifts to the outside world, to the idea of books filled with stories, not just saints and sermons, but tales of faraway lands, clever queens, or mischievous gods. You wonder if someday, nuns like you will be able to write them openly. You shake your head and return to the page. Mistakes must be scraped out with a knife and carefully re-inked. No one wants to get a reprimand from the abbess because you turned salvation into salivation. Still, there's pride in it. When the sunlight hits your fresh ink just right, the words shimmer. They look eternal. You think about how someone, hundreds of years from now, might read this exact page and wonder about the hands that made it. That thought carries you through the rest of the session. As the bell rings for evening prayer, you carefully blot your work, close the manuscript, and stretch your aching shoulders. Another few pages closer to finishing the Book of Hours. Another quiet mark you've made on the world. You leave the scriptorium with ink on your fingertips and a little smile at the fish you did end up sneaking into the bottom right margin. Tiny, tasteful, and definitely judgmental. After the quiet rhythmic scratch of the scriptorium, your ears are still tuned to silence, which is exactly what makes this next place feel like stepping into a sacred mystery. Because now, you're slipping behind the thick wooden shelves of the convent's private library. You weren't exactly told not to come here. But let's say it's not on the official tour. Most of the sisters stick to the authorized reading. Sermons, psalms, hagiographies. But tonight, after Vespers under cover of candlelight, you're headed to the section behind the red velvet curtain. Yes, the one that hasn't been dusted in 20 years and smells faintly of rose oil and rebellion. You draw aside the curtain and slip into a world of secrets. Contrary to popular belief, medieval convents weren't dry, joyless places obsessed with nothing but penance and rules. Some were surprisingly intellectual hubs, miniature think tanks for women locked out of the universities. These convents often had robust libraries filled not only with spiritual texts, but also with medical treatises, philosophical arguments, astrological charts, and, wait for it, forbidden romances. Yes, romances. In your hands now is a slim volume, handwritten and bound in worn velvet. You open to the first page and suppress a smirk. It's a retelling of the Roman de la Rose, a French allegorical poem that's technically about love and virtue, but spends a lot of time describing garden strolls, flirtations, and metaphysical longing. You read a few lines, mouthing the old French softly, and you feel awake. Historians still argue whether these forbidden texts were intentionally smuggled into convents by sympathetic confessors, or if some of them were penned by the nuns themselves under pseudonyms. Either way, these weren't just romantic fancies. They were part of a broader hunger for learning, complexity, and even a touch of emotional freedom. You move further down the row and spot something even more curious. A book of herbal remedies bound in lambskin, annotated heavily in the margins. Notes in different hands, different inks, layered over time. Recipes for sleeping draughts, poultices for fevers. One page is dedicated entirely to remedies for melancholy, including a curious suggestion involving roasted owl hearts. Don't ask. The book even contains a tiny cipher in one corner, a code used by medieval nuns to conceal sensitive information. Think of it like an early day diary log. Or maybe just a very nerdy inside joke. You hear footsteps in the hallway and freeze, not out of fear but anticipation. If it's Sister Marin, you know she's bringing the good stuff. Probably that scroll on Persian astronomy. If it's the abbess, well, better pretend you're searching for a lost psalter. There's a unique energy here. A quiet rebellion. A flicker of intellectual ambition in a world that doesn't quite expect it of you. You realize that for centuries, nuns like you, archivists of human curiosity. You weren't supposed to know how the world worked, but you did. You weren't meant to question, but you did. And here, in this dusty room that smells of beeswax and ink, you're part of a lineage that whispered questions when no one was listening. You run your finger over a passage on medicinal plants from Moorish Spain. You don't understand every word, but enough to catch the rhythm, enough to know someone wanted this knowledge preserved, even hidden. As the candle sputters low, you tuck the book under your robe, just for the night, and head for the dormitory. You'll return it, of course. Maybe even add your own notes. Knowledge, after all, is meant to be shared, even if sometimes it has to be hidden first. Back in your cell, the moonlight casting sleepy silver lines across the stone floor, you place the borrowed herbal manuscript gently under your pillow. You're planning to return it tomorrow, promise. But for now, its worn pages and strange concoctions feel oddly comforting. Like a whispered bedtime story from someone who really, really wants you to stop sneezing. Because here's the secret you didn't learn at Mass. Medieval nuns weren't just copyists and choir singers. They were also doctors. Well, kind of. Without the official license, of course. But when half your sisters are prone to chilblains, and Sister Margaret's got that thing with her left eye again, someone has to step up. You, it turns out, have a natural knack for it. You start your morning in the convent's physic garden, basically the world's coziest outdoor pharmacy. Lavender for nerves, rosemary for memory, pennyroyal for, well, you've read what it's for but you're not using it. Not since that one scandalous winter in Burgundy. As you gently crush the thyme leaves between your fingers, a soft herbal aroma lifts into the air. It's calming, familiar. You remember Sister Brigitte teaching you how to steep them properly? Never let the water boil. Always use earthenware. Whisper a prayer for healing. Not required, but it adds flair. Inside, you organize your makeshift apothecary on a wooden shelf by the infirmary. There's comfrey poultices, dried chamomile, and that one experimental balm you made from elderflower and hope. It worked surprisingly well on Sister Anne's soar back. Historians still debate how widespread and formal this healing knowledge really was. Some argue that many nuns were trained unofficially by physicians passing through, or inherited recipes passed down orally. Others suggest some convents maintained highly structured medicinal regimens, tiny hospitals really, with record-keeping that rivaled universities. Sadly, much of it is lost, tucked away in unnamed margins, and burned after reforms swept through. You wrap a patient's swollen ankle and hum a hymn softly. The rhythm calms them, and you. You remember reading that rhythm and sound can lower pain perception. You wonder if that's why Gregorian chants work. Or maybe it's just placebo with better acoustics. In between herbal rounds, you jot down your observations in a worn parchment journal. No one assigned you this task, but you're not the first nun to keep such a record. In fact, tucked in the abbey's oldest cabinet, there's a bundle of anonymous medical notes, neatly stitched together with crimson thread. No name, no title, just careful handwriting and quiet dedication. And while monks sometimes get the historical credit for preserving ancient knowledge, it was women like you, women who healed, stitched, and stewed, that often kept the community alive. Literally. You chuckle softly as you remember Sister Helena trying to cure hiccups with a prayer and 3 consecutive sneezes. It didn't work, but she insisted it only failed because someone blinked during the 3rd sneeze. Hiccup demons are shy, she whispered, dead serious. You keep her method in your notes anyway, just in case. Even the abbess, skeptical though she is, knows to come to you when her joints ache. She won't say thank you out loud, but last week she left a jar of plum jam on your table with no note. That's practically a proclamation of admiration. As night falls again, you light a small oil lamp by your desk. The flicker dances across your shelves of remedies, across dried bundles and sealed pots. It feels good to have purpose, to be the calm hands during fevers, the warm tea during chills. You may not be a real doctor. You may never publish a single treatise or appear in a university's dusty annals, but your remedies work, your patients sleep, and your notes, hidden though they may be, just might outlast the memory of your name. So tonight, as the bell tolls compline and the cloister quiets once more, you lay your journal beside your cot and smile. Healing, after all, is sacred work, whether or not anyone bothers to write it down. Tonight, something's different in the air. The bells have rung, the candles are out, but your eyelids refuse to drop. Maybe it's the full moon. Maybe it's the itch of curiosity. Or maybe it's because you know exactly what waits for you under the floorboard of the scriptorium. A forbidden book. That's right. Forbidden. The kind the abbess warned about. The kind that doesn't technically contradict scripture, but definitely doesn't help you meditate on the Psalms either. You only found it last week, tucked behind a loose panel, alongside a bundle of secret letters written in a hand so precise and poetic, you're convinced the writer had to be a nun too. You slide out of bed, careful not to wake Sister Beatrix, who sleeps like a stone gargoyle, but talks like a parrot when startled. You pad barefoot down the corridor, candle hidden inside your robe, past the cloister garden, now bathed in moonlight. There's a chill in the air, but excitement keeps your toes warm. Back in the scriptorium, the old oak floor creaks like it's startling on you. You shush it with a glare. You pull up the panel. There it is, the book and the letters. Their parchment is yellowed, the ink brown, but the emotions in the writing feel strangely fresh. Tales of longing, doubt, joy. Laughter so vivid you can almost hear it. Whoever this nun was, she had thoughts that couldn't be sung in Gregorian chant. You smile. You're not alone. You flip to the book. It's not heretical, it's philosophical, maybe even medical. Bits of Hippocrates muddled with local remedies. A strange diagram of what appears to be a beetroot dressed like a saint. One scholar might call it proto-science. Another might call it nonsense. Historians still argue whether nuns accessed secular texts like these intentionally, or if they were simply bored and had creative interpretations of what counted as scriptural commentary. You're leaning toward the latter. You take out your quill. The ink's cold, thick as molasses tonight. You dip and write. Not a copy of the letters, but a reply. You don't know if she's long dead or if this is just a game you're playing with time. But you answer her questions anyway. Yes, you feel alone sometimes. Yes, you wonder what's beyond these walls. No, you don't miss wearing real shoes. You pause. A drop of ink smudges the page, dark and round. You frown. The lamp flickers. Then suddenly, a sound. Footsteps. Light. Hesitant and close. You freeze, heart racing faster than a novice late for matins. The door opens slightly, and it's Sister Agnes. She looks at you, squints, and then hands you a small bundle. Fresh parchment. Extra ink. I figured you'd run out, she whispers. Don't smudge it this time. Then she's gone. You laugh softly into your sleeve. You're not the only midnight mischief maker, it seems. Agnes has her own stash, you're sure of it. Probably illuminated pages of rabbits jousting on snails. You settle back into your writing. Ink, parchment, silence. It's not rebellion. It's survival. A secret kind of freedom tucked inside obligation. You glance at the last letter in the bundle. A line jumps out. They think we sleep, but our minds wander like foxes in moonlight. You underline it, add your own, and sometimes they leave paw prints in ink. You awaken the next day, not to a bell, but to the unmistakable scent of something warm and cheesy. It curls down the hallway like a siren song. You squint toward the narrow beam of sunlight, peeking through the shutters, and realize, oh no, you've overslept. Again. But before panic fully sets in, your stomach growls. You can't help it. Whatever's happening in the convent kitchen today smells like it was designed by saints with culinary degrees. And just like that, your curiosity takes the reins. Today is a feast day. One of the few times when your meals might feature something beyond lentils, grape porridge, or yesterday's barley soup. A holy celebration means special dispensation, and that means cheese. Glorious, holy cheese. But not just any cheese. This is monastic cheese, the kind aged in cellars beneath centuries-old stone, turned by hand, blessed with patience, prayer, and a suspicious amount of salt. As you shuffle toward the kitchen, you catch sight of Sister Bertha, who, despite having taken a vow of silence years ago, somehow manages to run the convent kitchen with more authority than a Roman general. She gestures for you to help, and without a word, you're suddenly elbow-deep in curds. The kitchen is alive with gentle chaos. Wooden spoons clatter, pots hiss with steam, and behind the rhythmic chopping of herbs lies a symphony of secret techniques passed down through whispered tradition. Crush the fennel, but not too much, a novice mutters. Like how you'd scold someone. Firm, but not cruel. You nod solemnly. Understood. One of the kitchen's most prized possessions is an ancient cheese mold shaped like a tiny cathedral. Historians still argue whether it was a devotional object or just a very ambitious baking tool. Either way, it produces a miniature dairy basilica that's served only on the holiest of occasions or when Bertha's in an especially good mood. And it turns out, today she is. As you stir the thickening curd, Your thoughts drift. You recall that in some medieval convents, recipes were considered sacred intellectual property. They were guarded with the same fervor as theological treatises. One monastery in France was said to have a custard recipe so coveted it was written in code, stored in a locked chest, and guarded by a goose. Yes, a goose. Medieval security systems were deeply weird. Your hand cramps from stirring. You switch arms. A spoon drops in the distance. Someone yelps. Someone else prays. And through it all, the smell of caramelizing onions wraps around you like a warm blanket. You sneak a crumb of fresh bread from the table. No one sees you. Or at least, no one stops you. Perhaps a small miracle. In between stirring and slicing, Sister Agnes leans in and murmurs, "Do you think the cheese we're making today is as good as what the Romans made?" You consider it. Roman cheese making involved things like sheep's milk, pine resin, and storage in woven baskets. You shrug. Ours doesn't taste like a campfire in sadness, so? Yes? She chuckles. Then the bell rings for the meal. You sit with the others, a steaming slice of cheese pie before you, crust golden and flaky. For a moment, there's only chewing, nodding, a soft humming through the room. Someone even cries. It might be you. There's no sermon today, no long reading. Just the soft sound of satisfaction echoing through the refectory. Tonight, you'll be back to your quiet chores and whispered prayers. But right now, as you finish your last bite and steal a second helping when no one's looking, you feel something sacred in the simplicity. Sometimes, these holiest moments don't come with choirs or visions. They come with cheese. You're still digesting the blessed cheese pie when Sister Benedicta drags you gently, not by arm, but by sheer disapproving stare, toward the library. Apparently, it's your turn to help with the clocks. Not the big iron one in the bell tower. That's for the groundskeeper monks across the abbey wall, who seem to speak only in time increments and cryptic grunts. No, you're assisting with the much more peculiar assortment of indoor, nun-run, timekeeping devices. Wax-based, water-dripping, sand-shifting miracles of semi-reliable medieval engineering. It turns out, back before the mechanical tick-tocks took over, convents like this one relied on everything from candle clocks to dripping clepsydras to mark the sacred hours. After all, divine appointments don't keep themselves. Your task today? Monitoring the aqua horologium, the water clock. It's a large brass bowl with a tiny hole at the bottom, floating inside a wider basin. As it sinks slowly, it marks the passing of time. If it sinks too quickly, prayers happen too early. If it floats too long, someone's spiritual punctuality gets skewered. You lean close. A drop. Another. The sound is strangely soothing, like a distant stream murmuring secrets. You find your breath sinking to the rhythm. Time here doesn't march, it trickles. Sister Benedicta shows you the parchment chart, painstakingly inked to track how long each prayer window should last, depending on the season. Of course, medieval time wasn't like ours. An hour changed with daylight. Summer hours were long and lazy. Winter ones brief and brutal. Nothing like your smartwatch's rigid tyranny. You glance over at the candle clock. It's marked with tiny metal pins designed to fall out at exact intervals as the wax melts. The next one's due any moment. You wait, you blink. Tink. It drops, striking a small bell. Time to pray. Candle clocks, historians note, were especially loved in colder climates because they offered both light and warmth. But they had a flaw. Drafts. One overly excited novice once sneezed and set back matins by 45 minutes. She was promptly assigned to silent reflection for a week. There's also a sand timer, a curious hourglass shaped like a tulip. Historians still argue whether its bulbous base was intentional or just the result of someone overestimating medieval glassblowing skills. As you flip it and watch the grains trickle through, you feel like you're watching not just time pass, but memory. Each fleck a moment, each pile a prayer. There's beauty in this slowness, in this awareness that divine time doesn't need to be perfect, just intentional. Outside, the sky has dimmed. A hush spreads through the convent halls, broken only by distant footsteps and the occasional tick of a cooling roof tile. Back at the water clock, you add a few drops to correct the pace. Sister Benedicta nods in approval, a rare event that makes your chest warm. It's strange, really. The most spiritual duty of the day didn't involve speaking, kneeling, or even thinking. Just watching water fall and making sure others stay on beat with heaven's tempo. Maybe that's the point. In a world before iPhones, world clocks, or even reliable sunrise times, someone still had to make sure prayers arrived on time. And tonight, that someone was you. The final vigil of the night approaches. The air is thick with dew, and the candlelight shivers across the ancient stone walls. You're standing beside the rope pull for the bell, your final duty of the day, or, more accurately, the start of tomorrow. This is the alarm clock, the real one. Not the candle pins, not the dripping bowl, not the lazy sand timer. This is the bell, and it's your turn to wake up the world. But first, how did it come to this? Let's rewind a bit. Earlier that week, Sister Agatha let slip an origin tale over a bowl of cabbage stew. Legend has it that the first mechanical alarm bell was invented right here, or in a convent remarkably similar, by a nun named Gertrude of Nivelles, or was it Hildegard of Bingen? Historians still argue whether the invention can truly be traced to a single cloistered genius or whether it was a group effort over centuries of slow innovation. What we do know is that by the 12th century, nuns had started to modify early mechanical clocks, weights, gears, escapements, to include a triggering mechanism. These would strike bells at exact hours, alerting even the sleepiest novices when it was time to begin matins or lauds. Imagine, you're deep in slumber, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, dreaming about figs or the afterlife. Suddenly, dong. A resonant clang splits the air. It doesn't just wake you up, it startles your soul. A divine jolt. That's the effect Sister Teresa was aiming for when she personally adjusted the tension on the bell's weight pulley. She calls it her holy thunder. The bell, not Teresa. Though honestly, both fit. These bells weren't just for prayers. In emergencies, fires, storms, plagues, they were the communication hub, the medieval equivalent of a mass group text. Each pattern of rings carried meaning. 3 quick chimes, 1 long pull, a pause. Everyone knew what it meant. You had to. Survival depended on it. Now, tonight, you have the rope in hand. It's heavier than you expected. Worn smooth by hundreds of years of faithful tugs. You give it a test pull. The gears above creak. You feel the old mechanism respond. There's something thrilling about this analog responsibility. Like whispering to history and having it shout back in bronze. Around you, the convent is a sleeping creature. The breathing of a dozen sisters, the rustle of habits, the wind combing through high windows. You check the candle clock again. Half an inch remains. You glance at the water clock. Still dripping, faithfully. A rhythm older than you. Older than your doubts. The sand is nearly gone. You inhale, and with one firm, respectful pull, you ring the bell. Boom. The sound rolls across the hills. Birds stir, a dog howls. Somewhere, Sister Teresa smiles in her sleep. You did it. You woke up the convent, not with a jolt, but with ceremony. The nuns begin to stir. You hear the shuffle of feet, the clatter of wooden clogs. A hymn begins in the distance, off-key but warm. This is sacred punctuality, not enforced by apps or electric tones, but by devotion, creativity, and a sprinkle of medieval engineering. Even now, remnants of these monastic alarm systems echo through the halls of time. Our word clock comes from the Latin clocca, bell. Our routines, our obsession with schedules, our meetings and deadlines, they all descend from people like you, holding ropes under starlight. And while your modern alarm may feature Beyoncé or a duck quack ringtone, its spirit was born here, in silence, in stone, in shadow. Time to rest now. You've earned it. As the final echoes of the bell fade, the world softens. The rush of duty slips quietly into the background, replaced by the hush of old stone and drifting thoughts. You lie back in your narrow cot, wool blanket up to your chin, the scent of beeswax and old parchment in the air. Outside, the wind whistles low through the chapel eaves, blending with the memory of distant bells. Each sound, each silence, folds into the rhythm of rest. You think about the water clock still dripping, the sand timer still counting grains. Somewhere, someone is still watching time pass, faithfully, quietly. Just like you did. The nuns will carry on tomorrow, candles lit, prayers whispered, clocks adjusted. But tonight, for now, the world pauses. You let your breath slow. Inhale, exhale. There's no rush here, no emails, no alerts, just the gentle tug of sleep, pulling you deeper with every passing moment. You are held in the arms of quiet history. Soft light flickers behind your closed eyes. The bell will ring again. But not yet. Now is for stillness. Now is for dreams. Sleep well, timekeeper.